Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Talent and Globalization panel. Thank you very much for choosing us. I think it's very difficult to decide between innovation and productivity and talent and globalization, two very attractive topics. So I think you did the right choice, because do you know what is the most single important preoccupation among managers of this decade? Any clue? Finding talent. Exactly. This is the most significant trend among managers in the last decade. That's why this topic is so important in this Congress today. So the relevance it gets even higher when we think about global economy, and we clearly see that global economy has accentuated two categories of people: those that are high-skilled workers with mobility, and those from whom mobility is at best uncertain due to lack of skills or due to other personal or professional barriers. This means that talent and mobility go hand with hand. And this is why before we start, we need to look into the concept of mobility and try to understand that it is very much related to our culture and to our education. Just look to the northern countries in Europe and compare it with the southern countries in terms of how we educate our younger generations. Since the beginning, in the north of Europe, young people are incentivized to leave their countries and to have international experience since they are very young. Look into southern countries like Spain, Italy, or Portugal, where we want to keep them at home as much as possible, and we tell them just go to Europe and don't cross the ocean because it can be dangerous. And this type of culture has been dividing the way we look into the international possibilities and the mobility of our highest skilled young people. Just to give an example from the business I work in, the education and academics, you know that all graduates now in Europe have the possibility to spend one term abroad under what is called the Erasmus program. Do you know what are the countries that Portuguese graduates select for this period of time? Do you know? Very good. Spain is one, and what is the second one? No. It's Brazil, and specifically it's Rio. Spain is clearly because their parents tell them, go to Spain, it's very close, if something happens, we will go and rescue you. Brazil is for the ones that have more open-minded parents that allow them to do whatever they want, and they are looking for a more intense learning experience. So they decide to go to the other side. But in fact, all this is conditioning a lot the way we prepare our young talents to the world today. There are 5 million Portuguese abroad. Most of them went out from Portugal in the 60s and 70s, and with that migration flows that happened at that time. But in the last 2 years, what is called the brain drain has been increasing a long time. And another example from the academic world is also very, very relevant to explain this movement. When people start their MBA, we ask them, are you planning to have an international experience after, or do you plan to stay in Portugal? The most common answer 3 years ago was, no, I want to stay in Portugal. I want to grow up my kids here because this is the right country to have kids and to live. The last year, the most common answer is, I want to go abroad. I want to have an international experience because I don't find here the opportunity I'm looking for. I can tell you that 1/3 of my graduates this year that graduate in December are going abroad. So This is just a representation of what is going on today in terms of brain drain. But just to clarify the concept, when we talk about brain drain, we refer to permanent or long-term international immigration of skilled people who have been the subject of considerable educational investment by their own countries, by their own societies. Few people and few countries have records of migration flows. Anyhow, just numbers doesn't represent the extent or loss or the quality of the manpower lost. And it's obvious that the sending and the receiving countries have benefits and drawbacks by having these migration flows. But what is clear for us, for the three of us, is that the prevention of the transnational migration is not possible, neither possible nor desirable. We believe that Portugal gains a lot by having foreigners here, high-skilled foreigners. We believe that Portugal earns a lot by having high-skilled workers abroad, and we believe that this circulation of talent is beneficial for the country. That is why we don't call it brain drain, but brain circulation. So we believe that Portugal needs to be proactive in the creation of networks that includes the diaspora, that includes the high-skilled workers that are here in Portugal and are not Portuguese. And you will see that the importance of these networks is going to be highlighted by both keynote speakers, because we believe that being connected and belonging to these sharing communities is going to be a cornerstone in the challenge that Portugal is facing nowadays. So just to recall you, our challenge this afternoon is to answer 3 questions. The first one is how to design and implement a winning strategy to brain circulation of both Portuguese and foreigners. The second one is how to mobilize the diaspora to create value for the country. And the third one, how to tap into the opportunity presented by globalization and by technology and communication. So for this big challenge, we have 2 top-notch keynote speakers that are experts in the field of talent and globalization. So let me introduce you to Mr. Evgeny Kuznetsov. He is a senior economist from the World Bank, and he works in the area of innovation and growth. Evgeny is a specialist in technological innovation and international migration of high-skilled workers. He has a blended perspective. On one hand, he is a practitioner because he has been working in several operational projects in the field, in Argentina, in Mexico, in Chile, in Tanzania, in Russia. And on the other hand, he also has the academic or the scholar perspective because he writes articles and books on that topics. His most recent work is focused on diasporas of high-skilled workers as change agents to promote institutional development in their home countries. On my right, we have Mr. Anil Menon. He's the president of Globalization and Smart Plus Connected Communities at Cisco. He leads all the global initiatives and efforts in Cisco. And just to clarify, the Smart Plus Connected Communities are focused on working with cities and countries in order to create a network as a platform for driving economy, social, and environmental sustainability. Prior to Cisco, Mr. Anil Menon was vice president of corporate strategy at IBM Corporation. And he also has a strong academic background because he has been related with several universities around the world. So he can also have both perspectives. Without any further ado, please, Mr. Evgeny could not solve.
I think it's up there.
It's up there.
Bom dia, and it's obviously a pleasure and a privilege to be here. What I'll try to do in the 15 or 20 minutes that I have is to give some motivation and the reason for my excitement in this area of brain circulation. So as Belém already mentioned, talent is the most precious resource in the world. But the market for talent is becoming increasingly global. That's what economists call, in its lingo, increasing return to scale, which means, and scope, which means that the talent looks for like-minded people, which implies that people, the best and brightest, no matter what, would still go to Silicon Valley, Route 128, Cambridge, MA, Bangalore, India now, whatever some critical mass of innovation is. And it applies to developed countries, to developing countries, and that's why, by the way, whenever United States, for all its problem now, remains a magnet for the talent, it is probably going to be okay in the long run. And here is some illustration of this thought. It's data from OECD 2000. One of the interesting fact about we have the title of the Congress, Quantifying the Future, so I try to do my best. And the best we can find, it's really 2000 OECD data. And what is tried to convey is that, for instance, is how much university-educated graduates, for instance, from India are living in OECD economies. So there would be, India is predictably is number 2. It's almost 1 million university-educated Indians from India, which is living in OECD economies. Philippines is predictably number 3, predictably because they created the only large country in the world which actually had a university system, higher education system, which is an export-oriented industry. They basically train people to be nurses and teachers in the US, which also shows you that the aggregate numbers are not particularly suggestive, because you can't possibly compare overachievers from India, of which Anil is one example, to nurses that that you would have from Philippines. We need both of them. I don't try to to pass a judgment on people from Philippines. And the quiz for the audience: which country do you think occupies number 1? You have China on number 5. India is number 2, almost 1 million tertiary educated graduates. But number 1 with 1 million plus, what country that would be? No. It's fairly easy to guess. Try. No. China is number 5. No. Try. Of course. UK have, again, it's 2000 year numbers. It's very old. But if you recall what UK was in 2000, that's a country with it still is with English language and fairly good universities. So it's fairly easy to guess where these British are. They are in the US. And again, Portugal in 2000. If we crunch the numbers a little bit different way, it would be around 80,000. It's fairly small number, but what I want to call attention, that numbers are not particularly good indicator of the phenomenon that we are trying to capture here. So anyway, it's just a quiz that I wanted to put. So four scenarios for the talent, 4 scenarios for skills. Be productively employed in the country. That's growth of innovation clusters and non-traditional experts. That's the ideal scenario, that what we want. Leave the country and be lost for it. That it was Belém already mentioned. It's brain drain. Leave the country and be engaged with the project in the home country, this is brain circulation, and leave and come back, return migration. And the common mistake which we see from country to country is that there is too much of attention to return migration. And it's very easy to understand why, because no one wants to see its talent go away. There is always a tendency, almost like a knee-jerk reaction, to get it back. And frankly, the evidence doesn't pinpoint to that direction, because yes, talent goes away, but once there are interesting conditions to engage the talent in the home country, it's tend to engage with the project and then comes back. A good benchmark for Portugal now would be Taiwan. In the beginning of 80s, there was a massive immigration from Taiwan, and Taiwanese abroad, particularly Taiwanese in Silicon Valley, helped to develop early stage venture capital industry in Taiwan, which is a very rare beast, which doesn't exist almost anywhere in the world except UK, US, Taiwan, and Israel. Certainly doesn't exist in Germany or Japan, but they helped to develop it. I wouldn't go into details of the story, but the moral is the following. Once the innovation cluster has developed in Taiwan, most of these people are now coming back to Taiwan. And the process has just started in India, but barely started. So that the private sector now complains that they're losing vital connection to the world centers of innovation, like Silicon Valley and those usual suspects. So this is the kind of dynamics that we are after. And another common mistake that particularly the government, they tend to be more concerned about scientists, or Africans would be about doctors, for instance, rather than something which is more relevant usually for countries like people like you. It's sort of business and technological executive. That's where, in a way, the future of every country lies. So some paradoxes of brain circulation, and they are paradoxical because country after country, we find that the binding constraint for this joint project are not on the diaspora side. Diaspora can be brilliant, resourceful, entrepreneurial, engaging, but it's home country institutions which make the difference. A good example would be here Armenia, which has extremely powerful, extremely entrepreneurial diaspora, and they are giving billions of money to home countries, their pocket money, but nothing changes in terms of institutional conditions at home. And from this perspective, by the way, Portugal looks extremely well, because with the general strike around us, happening right now, it perhaps easy to forget, and the general crisis in Europe now, it is easy to forget the tremendous progress that Portugal did in the last 10 and particularly 5 years in the area of R&D development, higher education, and high technology in general. For instance, there was a recent OECD report in this area which showed that the share of R&D expenditures in Portugal is now 1.7%, which is increased twice just in 5 years. And the share of R&D staff in labor personnel is now higher than OECD on average, significantly actually higher. So there was a tremendous progress in the recent 10 years, which wouldn't go away with the crisis. And this is precisely this domestic condition which would attract your talent to be engaged in joint project with the country. So in the best of circumstances, actually, the diaspora becomes part of the country. It's become part of everyday practices in the country. Success stories are extremely important because we can have talks, conversation, meeting databases, but nothing convinces more than success, more than real-life successes. For instance, ventures which are created by overachievers from Portugal, and there are examples of those. And in the end, we are after a very elusive concept, which I call, for the lack of the better term, guided serendipity. Again, it's an oxymoron when you hear it, because serendipity can't be guided. You are creating, it's like trying to capture a bird. It fly away. You're trying to target these highly successful people and try to develop projects with them. And it can't be formalized too much, because if you formalize it too much, you're going to kill it. I will give an example in a moment what I mean by that. To be a bit more practical, how we organize this diaspora engagement. Again, the key point to make that the data is not particularly helpful in this area. What many countries is trying to do is first count their highly skilled diasporas. Again, not particularly important in terms of first steps that you would want to make, because heterogeneity again becomes extremely important. These people, they are unique. Cultural talent is different from talent in the area of technology. That is different from the science. People in high position in corporations, you can usually count them in single numbers. But as Anil would tell you, they were absolutely critical in trying to convince first multinationals to establish their R&D laboratories in India. They were first movers, and first movers are always, by definition, sort of unique. So uniqueness, you can't count uniqueness. This is the point. One example where it worked, and I would like perhaps to spend a couple of minutes in outlining how it works, is actually Scotland. Scotland, as you all know, is part of UK, which received a bit more decentralized powers as part of the political process in the 90s, and then it is still less developed area of United Kingdom. So they have what might be called Schumpeterian public sector, of which one of example is Scottish enterprise, meaning that it's a public sector, but it's not public, part of a civil service rule. So they created a network of 900 high-powered Scots from all over the world. It's an elite network. They had their first meeting during their 4 years of existence, and the whole point is to articulate connections between these high-powered Scot people. Chairman of Monsanto, for instance, used to be one, and he still is, of members of this global Scot network. So how would you engage people of this caliber, who are extremely busy, but also extremely influential in the joint project with Scotland? And there are many examples, for instance, when they became mentors. They would become advisors to various projects and business firms in Scotland. But one of my favorite examples actually comes in the area of biotechnology, because biotechnology is something which every country is now tries to get into. That is one of the areas of the future. But the fixed investment is tremendously high. Initial startup investment. It's very easy to make a mistake, because you're actually making strategic bets of a very long-term horizon. So when Scotland became to develop their biotech strategy, they basically had two choices. One usual trajectory is to commission a report from McKinsey, pay certain $1 million, and then try to implement recommendation. or rely on the members like chairman of Monsanto who are already in this area. And they actually followed the second strategy, had a number of closed-door meetings with them, and tried to develop pilot projects in terms of research and development, business development, which would sort of, in a way, be antennas to show how this area can develop in the future. And then they would become mentors in the implementation. And it worked fairly well. So here you have this example of this guided serendipity, because there is certain structure, very humble structure, which is called Global Scot, which is trying to make these connections between home country development, Scotland in this case, and overachievers abroad, Scottish in the US, mostly in this case. But it does it in a non-bureaucratic, light touch manner. So the project has a life of their own. It is something very concrete, very specific. Other members see that they can be very useful indeed for the development of UK and Scotland, and it actually also serves their professional interest. They are not, it's not philanthropy. It's, you're looking for the win-win. And finally, a couple or maybe three suggestions for Portugal. And it's always a bit arrogant for a foreigner to come and make suggestions for another country, particularly in a country in such a juncture as Portugal now. But again, from a very humble perspective, there are these three suggestions. The first may be create a program, something like Global Portugal, maybe similar to Global Scot. And again, the key point here that it can't be a program in the vacuum. It needs to be housed somewhere. But you have a number of very promising, very interesting technology incubators, and there is several networks of these technology incubators developing quite actively. So that may be an institutional home for such a program. Closed-door meetings about next step, how to take advantage of your overachievers abroad, which usually involves highest authorities in the government. In case of Taiwanese, for instance, there was a minister without portfolio, but who had a tremendous power within the government, who initiated this process in Taiwan in the beginning of 80s. And the third point is simple, but it is easy to forget. You need to create a buzz about this brain circulation, because the usual inclination is to focus on the return of, and it would actually help to celebrate. I think it's a nice word, whatever projects which are already underway between the Portuguese talent abroad and home country institutions. So this is a quite simple message, frankly, but I think it has a tremendous potential for the country and for the world. Thank you.
Very much. Anil, would you like to share your points of view with us?
Thank you, Bella. Thank you, Evgeny. Good afternoon. Oh, you can be a little bit more excited. Come on. Good afternoon. It's a beautiful day here. This is a very interesting topic for me to be speaking on. I never thought growing up in India, in Bombay, that there would come a time when I would be coming to Portugal to talk about globalization and global talent, especially because I used to be beaten up by the Portuguese Jesuit teachers of mine, and I didn't want to have anything to do with Portugal ever again in my life. But most seriously, I think what I want to do is, I want to build on the points that Evgeny made, but pepper it with some examples, because for me, I look back my career of 30 years, and I see this as a journey on globalization. Today, I run globalization for Cisco, and I have to think constantly in my life seems to be a globalization lifestyle. I was telling somebody, they asked me, when did you get here? I said, last Sunday, I flew to Delhi to have dinner with the CEO of Andrade, Otavio, who was visiting India. And then I had dinner with him, and then from there I went to the airport, caught a 2:30 flight to go to Incheon, Korea, so that I can meet with the mayor of Incheon that evening of Monday night. And Tuesday morning had an announcement with the mayor of Incheon, the CEO of Korea Telecom, and myself. We had an announcement. Then that evening, I had one other meeting, and then I flew to Portugal. So through Paris, 17 hours later, I got in last night. And I've come from, after being in America for 30 years, I eat at 7 o'clock in the evening. 7:30, whoa, it's too late now. So last night I had dinner with one of your proud sons, Zainal Baba, and guess who? Otavio, who's flown back from India through Brazil and Paris. He comes, so we had dinner at one of your fancy restaurants. And they said, we'll eat early tomorrow. I was so happy. 10 o'clock. I have to get this, talk about globalization. My body can't take 10 o'clock eating. Because by 10 o'clock, I've already slept half an hour, and I'm thinking about should I wake up again. So here you are. Today I'm here. Tomorrow morning I go to Paris for a meeting, and then I get on a plane and get into Bangalore on Saturday evening. So that has been my life for the last 3 years. It is 22 days on the road, usually 2 countries to 3 countries a month. And it has been an extraordinary ride for me, but for 30 years. So what I want to do is I want to connect this to the whole diaspora point, because I remember 30 years ago, or even 20 years ago, when I went to the US for education, the questions I used to get, they would say, Indian? Yes. Do you still have cows on the street? That was number 1 question for an Indian. The number 2 question for an Indian was, how do you speak English so well? Number 2 questions. The number 3 question is, do you still have caste system? And I have not been asked that question in the last 15 years. Maybe I'm spending time with better quality people now. That could be one example. But I don't get asked that question, because today when they see an Indian, they're saying, you're taking my job away? So there's been a little shift. So I want to connect the dots for the last 30 years and some lessons that I've learned that I try to drive not only at work, but also with my daughters. And I thought it might be of interest to share with you, and then we can have a discussion. So, you know, the most telling, and I'll start with 30 years ago. I remember when I was applying for graduate school in India, when you went for your visa to the American embassy, they wanted to know, are you coming back? 99% never thought they're coming back, but they lied. Oh, of course we're coming back. We want to build India. We want to make India a great, shining state. I said the same lies. I went in, I made up resumes about my uncle has got this business, my uncle has that business. They don't even have any business. I came from a middle-class family because I said, I'm never coming back here. Once I leave this country, you're lucky if I show up even for a vacation. Because as far as I was concerned, in 1980, there was no opportunity for me. Unless you were from a rich family or politically connected, there was nothing in India on an average. So I was going to get the heck out of India and be happy. So I remember going for this interview, and I could tell that the guy who was interviewing me knew I was lying, and I knew he knew that I was lying. But we did this very good thing, and he said, well, if this guy's not coming back, I think he may be okay. So they passed me. And I ended up in the US as a graduate student. But I'll never forget, because I went to the airport. Those of you who know, Asians don't like to go travel alone. 30 family members show up to say bye to them at the airport. Especially when you're 19 years old, as I was, and the first person in my entire family to go outside of India, outside of Bombay. There were about 100 people, I think, showed up. My father was there. I'm the oldest son. So those of you who don't know the Indian culture, oldest son is an important one in India. And I'm told later by my younger brother, who came to America the year after, that as he was walking out, his best friend asked him, when is your son coming back home? And my dad didn't say a word, and didn't say anything for 5 minutes. Then he turned to his friend and he said, you don't understand, he just went home. Because ever since I was a little boy, I knew I was going to go to the US. That was for me the place where I could shine. So my family knew that I was building myself to go to the US. And that is an important lesson that I want to come back to, because I think it's an important lesson for all youngsters and for our country as it grows and country what we connect. Play it all the way up. almost 25 years later, I'm at IBM, and we are starting our India strategy, and I was driving it on the strategy team, and Sam Palmisano, the current chairman and CEO, I remember him one day standing at the stage because the IBM stock was really not doing well. Really bad. It was from 125, it went down to 58, it was at 67, 68, so everybody was upset. And I'll never forget him standing there and saying, you come to IBM to make a difference in the world. You come to IBM because there are Nobel laureates. You come to IBM because we make people's lives better. You don't come to IBM to become rich. If you want to become rich, go start a software company or go to India. And I'm sitting there saying, 30 years ago, I never thought I would hear the sentence that said, if you want to be rich, go to India. And for me, it was a full circle. Now, why would you say that? And what about India that went from a place that people ask, we have cows, to where now it's become a globalization center? Is it something that the government did? Let me tell you, no. India is globalizing despite the government efforts. It was because of the people, the culture of the people, and the entrepreneurial set of the IT sector. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Now, the second thing that I want to say is, which is also very interesting, is my daughter. We moved to India 3 years ago as an expat. So I'm there for a few more years. My daughter, who was born and raised in New York, when we were getting ready to go to India, she says, I love India. You know, Dad, I love my grandparents. I go every year, but I'm not living there, okay? I said, no, but you got to go to school. He says, 1 month. In 1 month, if I don't like it, I'm coming back. So we said 1 year. So the negotiations began. Down to 6 months. She's 3 months, 6 months. Then she screamed, cried. We went to India. 3 weeks later, she's not complaining as much. She's got 1.5 hours in an unair-conditioned bus going one way to the school, an hour and a half back to the house, just to give you a perspective on the school. And she's not going to an international American school. I put her into an Indian international school. 100% of the kids are Indian, born and raised in India. So I figured you suffer for a while like I did for 20 years of my life. And the third week she was okay. Fourth week I'm telling my wife, I don't think she's unhappy anymore. I'll ask her, are you happy? I hate it here. When are we going back? But she doesn't have that complete conviction. Her eyes didn't convict. After 6 or 8 months I asked her, I said, listen, Ambika, I know you like it here. Who said I like it here? I said, I know you like it here. So tell me why. I don't like it here. I want to go back to my country. I want to go back to New York. I said, tell me seriously, why do you like it here? She said, you know what? The kids are cool here. So I said, what do you mean by they're cool? She said, I thought they wouldn't know what I'm saying. They wouldn't understand me. But they not only know Glee. I didn't know what Glee was, but I said, it's great. They know Glee. They know the songs. They listen to Ludacris. And Dad, they talk about FIFA. I didn't even know what FIFA is. So she's learning soccer. She's learning about European stuff. She's learning about Asian stuff that she never even heard while she was living in Scarsdale, New York. So she loves it because the kids are global and none of them ever lived outside of India. They had become truly growing up as global. So to me, there was a breadth here, which is the ideas that I want to bring up. Because to me, whenever we talk about globalization, there's this notion you have to travel. So the first thing that I always tell people is that when you think about globalization, as a company, almost as any company, I said, every globalization effort that did not start from strengths failed. So the first thing is, you don't globalize out of weakness. And very often, countries and people think about globalizing when the economy is bad, when there are no jobs, and they're saying, now let me globalize. And people are saying, I know why you're coming to me now, because you don't have jobs and you don't have your economy. Go the heck away. Come to me when you don't need me, and you're more credible. So globalization is something that has to be, because out of weakness, you can't globalize as a company. And the same thing is true even as a globalization culture. So I'm going to come back to that in the bill. The second one, of course, is the strengths. The next one, and I want to pick up on the diaspora, because I think it's a very important one. And I go back again to the Indian diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, the Chinese diaspora, and the other diasporas that are there. And I remember the other thing that was a big problem for us is at IBM, when I was doing the India strategy, it was 4,000 people in India, in IBM. This year, it'll cross 130,000 people in India, in IBM India, in 6 years. In 6 years, it'll be the second largest location after the US. Now, as they were building it, I remember always Sam saying, Anil, you and I are the only ones who have to keep pushing this India thing, because you know what? My biggest problem are all your other Indian colleagues. Because the ones who kept saying there are no talent in India, there are no skills in India, all the Indians who are working inside IBM, senior executives, who left India 20 years ago like me, saying I'm never going back there. They haven't gone back there, and they were actually the ones who made it easy for the non-Indians to say there are no talent in India. And so that comes in the notion of the diaspora. It is not so much as you need to get them to come back to your country, but are they even going to be an advocate for your country? Are they even going to be thinking about the values and the challenges that are there? It has changed a little bit now, but it was a hard battle, because it is hard for a person like me to stand up and say, you got to do this, when there's one other Indian sitting there saying, look, I'm also Indian, I got it, man. There are no skills in India, trust me. They can't speak, they don't know how to work in a multinational, they don't know. And all of them are a little true, but all those skills are developable. You can develop it over time. So I come back to this point, and this is something I do in my company. I do it to my employees, to people who report to me. I tell them, you always want to create a condition where everyone should be able to go away to something as opposed to going away from you. And too often when we talk about diaspora, people like me who left India before, we were going away from India, we were going to something. But today, what is great is if you can create an environment where you say, go to something, go make yourself better, make yourself great, because you know what, when they are, they will think about where they came from. And to me, we have to always consider that, because part of that comes back to this whole notion is, are you creating a network where you're taking it one way versus two way? Are you feeding the network? Is that diaspora rich, but are you also feeding back into the diaspora? And the strongest diasporas are the ones where they take from the diaspora and they give back to the diaspora something. It has to be not one way. The whole classic line of John Kennedy, ask not what you can do for your country, but not what your country can do for you, but what can you do for the country. Same thing with the diaspora. Don't ask what they can do for you. Ask them what have you done for them to make them more successful. And if it is only a nationalistic sense, it won't last. Because the ones who are nationalistic ones are usually not the ones who are going to help you build the economy. There has to be a rational structure to it. And that's where Taiwan and the others are much more aggressive. So I do want to bring up this notion of brain circulation and what does this mean, and global mindset. I've been grappling with that as to what does it mean. I really don't think you need to travel, you need to physically relocate to become global citizen and to have a globalized. I really don't. Now today I don't think so. However, it helps. It does help a lot. But having said that, I have now, in my experience, seen people who have never left their country, but they understand global thinking because they understand the history of the world, they understand the cultures of the world, and they can relate to people. If you look at the CEO of Citibank in India, I sit on the board of Citibank in India, the CEO of Indian Bank, as he was talking, I asked him, when did you come back from the US? He said, I never left India. I only worked at Citibank in India. But you could not tell by looking at him, working with him, that he has never, ever worked outside. He's traveled because of Citibank, but he hasn't worked. Which led me to start thinking, what does this mean? And I asked this of Klaus Schwab, the chairman of World Economic Forum. We were having dinner a couple of years ago, and I asked him on this. And he said, you know, Anil, in my experience, the majority of the global, let me phrase it, the majority of the CEOs of global 500 companies that I have met are not global. He said they're not globally minded. They can tell you their market shares in every country that they operate. They can tell you how many employees they have in each of the countries. They can even tell you how much revenues they're getting, but they're not global citizens. They don't have a global way of thinking. It has been a very interesting mindset. I haven't quite put, you know, even though I have an academic background, I've been trying to put structure to this. What does that mean? And beginnings of that thing started clicking, and I'll just give you the beginnings of it. 2 years ago, I was coming back from US. My daughter had traveled with me because she was skiing. And as she landed, as we were going to a house in Bangalore, she said to me something that triggered something for me, and I've been thinking about it. She said, hey, Dad, you know what is weird? As we were going, and there was a cow crossing the street. He said, did you see that cow, Dad? I said, yeah. I don't feel like it's strange. So I said, what do you mean? He said, last week, I was in Aspen, and I never felt like I lived in India. I come here and I've forgotten about Aspen and I feel like I'm back in India and I don't even feel this is strange. So I started thinking about it, and I started thinking in my own context. I remember when I used to land, I always said, I like this better than Paris. I don't like this as much as London. I like this, the people here. Today when I land, I don't even think. I tell my daughter, when you land in a country, you should never compare the country to other countries. You should take it for what it is, get to know the people. If you have studied the history of it, you won't ever compare. It becomes natural. So when you're in Seoul and you're talking to Koreans and they don't speak English very well, you won't sit there complaining or finishing their sentences. You will have the patience to let them finish their sentence. And then when you go to a different country, you won't. I said, you have begun that. Because in a day, you have moved from an American context to an Indian. I'd like for you to get to multiple contexts. You don't have to speak the language, but you need to appreciate the culture and the history. Because once you do that, you start thinking about global mindset. And I always ask people who speak multiple languages. I'm not one of those lucky people who speak multiple language. But they always, I've heard this expression, I think in English and then I convert. Or I think in Portuguese and then I have to translate. But if you are bilingual, you do that without even being aware of it. To me, that's a global mindset. When you can get to the place where I can interact with Jean and say he's Portuguese, but it's only after I explicitly think that he's Portuguese that I can relate. You can do that without necessarily leaving your country, but you have to build that. And I think, to me, why is Portugal exciting? I always tell people, I said, yeah, you're having a great deal of struggles right now, but when you have a history, as Portugal does, when you go into multiple countries and you see the impact of Portuguese culture and the impact of the Portuguese influence, I look at myself. I know for a fact I wouldn't be who I am today without the Portuguese. I know that. Even though I hated the guys, Joaquim Mascarenhas, who used to beat the crap out of me and used to tell my parents he's either going to become a criminal or he'll become somebody good. I'm going to make sure he's beaten up now before the police starts beating him. That's what he used to say. Father Lobo, Father Joe Diabrio, I still remember, I can still see their faces. Now the fact is, when I get to see 16 different projects and somebody comes and says, we want to do something in Portugal, I've never been to Portugal till I came last year, there's a personal affinity that says, these Portuguese who helped me, I'm going to do something that I can, if I can. And I think the key here is, can you create a diaspora that is not just Portuguese, but also the network of people who have been influenced by Portuguese? Because there are lots of people who have never been to Portugal, never worked with the Portuguese, but will have some memory. And can you identify that and build? Because that is more natural. That is going to be more sustaining. So to me, that's the kind of stuff that I think we should be talking about as we think about, because otherwise what happens is then it's tied to an economic circumstance. So when I look at Portugal, I say, you know what, look at all the ups and downs that you have gone through in your entire historical period. 2 years of economic crisis, you can overcome it if you remember that. And the diaspora is there that gives you the strength of the network. So those are the kinds of things that, whether it's Portugal or whether it's India, and today I'm much more proud. I remember when I left to the US, I grew a beard, I had long hair. When people thought, hey, are you Mexican? I was so happy. I was like, really? I look like a Mexican? Thank you. Because I wanted to be anything but an Indian. When they told you you're an Arab, I said, this is even better. I even had my beard cut the way the Arabs cut their beards, just so people thought I was an Arab. Why? Because India had not instilled in me. But as I got older, I recognized what I did get from India and the cultural context of India. And today, India does a better job of letting its diaspora know that we value you. And I think that's the whole importance, that we value what you have accomplished elsewhere. Whether it's at a lower level, making money in Middle East, or whether it's a high level working in US or in Portugal or anywhere else. And I think that's how we could create a global workforce. I'll stop now because I've already gone over my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I have a question here that I would like to put to you too, that is related with the parallel that exists in the alumni networks that the university has all around the world, and the way they convince their alumni to give back to the university, to the alma mater, what they have received from. And they are available to be ambassadors of those schools. They are available to give internships. They are available to represent the school in public events. And in fact, they are also getting something back. They are getting the fact of being associated with a prestige school, and sometimes they get back by being speakers, being keynote speakers, having different positions and functions in universities. What can we learn from that type of networks that can be applied to this specific network that we are trying to build here in Portugal?
I think it's in a way a very good parallel and the benchmark. I don't know whether you know, but the endowment of Ivy League universities are enormous. They're huge, billions of dollars. And I think the whole point of working with alumni, it's actually starting a conversation about a project. So the way these highly successful people, first of all, only less than 1% of alumni contribute 99% towards the endowment. So it's a familiar Lorentz curve, actually, which we see in different areas of life. But these universities would never ask for money because it's counterproductive. They would actually, well, we, Harvard, or we, MIT, have this vision of the future. In this vision of the future, how do you see this from your perspective? You are maybe a CEO of Monsanto, for instance. You will be like Anil. Well, you start first a conversation about, how do you see the future of the university in 20 years? And then you break up this very compelling, very inspiring vision in a more specific projects. For instance, would you would we need a biotech laboratory to make this happen? And the point 4 and 5 in the conversation they would be asked, well, it's an interesting project. Would you like to contribute with your funds, your ideas, and with your connections? And it usually works. People who have resources would be able to contribute. So I think that's the whole point, and the whole point, I think, that what Anil was trying to make, that you want to engage the diasporas in the conversations over strategic projects in the country. And then try to see whether they can be helpful in articulating the project, but also in implementing that. And this point of enlightened self-interest, I think, comes over and over again in all this discussion, because people, it's a nice topic that we are talking, because it touches both the mind and the heart. That's why people want to get involved. They would still have affinity with their, with their home countries, where they remember the people, the nature, and everything. That's part of their identity. But you have to be engaged in this conversation about the project. That's what I would draw from this parallel.
Okay.
No, I think Evgeny has covered the key points. I'll just reiterate sustainable engagement in giving or the others. When I was a professor, I used to tell my students, I can teach you better than anybody else can, but I can never make you learn. The best thing I can do is create an environment where you want to learn. And you learn through the interaction, and just because I've started talking doesn't mean you've started listening. And just because I've stopped talking does not mean you've stopped thinking. And the whole idea of that is the whole. So the same thing applies here. Is just because you go and talk to the diaspora the first time, they're not even listening to you. And you'll have to do this again and again, again and again, again and again, again and again. And it's only over a period of time that they say, okay, I think they're seriously wanting to engage with me. That's what universities do. Right. That's why they succeed more with undergraduate than with graduate school. And I think anyone with money can see through people who are looking at them only for money. And that's the other thing. So I think it is that long-term engagement where you're saying this is an important part.
If I can summarize it in one metaphor, I think the art here and the trick to be humble and ambitious at the same time. You want to be humble in the short run because you want small steps, but ambitious in the longer run because the future of the university or the country is at stake. Nothing less. That's the whole point.
Another question before we open questions to the audience. Anil, do you think that the next step in terms of globalization is such a situation in which nationality will not matter anymore and countries will not matter anymore, but talent will be the key?
I don't think we'll ever get there.
No?
I mean, if you look at the statistics, my friend Pankaj Gamawat, who used to be at Harvard, now at SACE in Spain, he studied it. Do you know only 2% of all telephone calls in the world, 2%, less than 2% of telephone calls in the world leave the country of origin? That means, you know, whether you like it or not, people are still connected. If you look back, I think Portugal, I tell people, let's work with Portugal and let's work with Portugal Telecom and the others to connect into Angola and Mozambique, because we don't know Africa, but let's work through our partners in Portugal and get into Angola, Mozambique, or some others, because that network of cultural connections, language connection, colonial connections matter. Whether they like it or not, it matters over time. And I do not believe the more global you become, the more national you become aware. The question is whether you're circumscribed by that. So I think any efforts to reduce national, political, or geographic boundaries is a wasteful experience. The question is, you know, I'm Indian by birth. I think of myself as American, and to my dying day I will, because I know I got the options for my hard work only in America. I could not have gotten that in India. I know that in my head, in my heart. So I'll never probably go back to America to live, but if there's anything I can do for America, I will do sitting in India, just like I do for Portuguese, because I still remember my fathers, and I say that education they gave me is the reason why I could go to graduate school. By the way, I'm not the only one. 30 to 40% of all successful Indians were trained by Jesuits in India, by Portuguese. That's your diaspora too.
And you have Goa.
What's that?
And you have Goa.
That's right. And I've never been to Goa in my life. I will go there, but I've not been there.
Okay, so now we are going to open the questions to the audience, but before that, we are going to use a technological device to get your opinion on two key issues that are related with this panel. So you all have in your chairs a device, a voting device, and it's very easy to use. You just need to select the right option, or the option you would like to choose, and that's all. You will have 15 seconds to do that. So our first question is the following. What type of action do you find most useful to promote Portugal and its talent? 1, a virtual platform of successful Portuguese citizens and initiatives in different sectors. Second option, a Portuguese innovation hub to attract interests of other countries to Portugal. Third, network of high-powered Portuguese diaspora to identify opportunities for the country. 4, a Portuguese sales force with successful Portuguese citizens to visit key countries. 5th, a fund to attract interesting projects to Portugal to prove Portuguese talent and capacity. There is not one right answer. This is not an exam. So please feel free to vote in the one that you think is the most useful to promote Portugal and its talent. We're starting now the countdown. You can vote several times, but just the last one is the one that it will stay in the system. Okay. So, looks like clearly 42.9% of the audience thinks that the network of high-powered Portuguese diaspora is the most useful initiative to promote Portugal and its talent. Who in the audience has voted on this one? Can you share with us why did you did that?
This is what happens when a professor is moderating. You get called on.
Well, I think that especially because of what Anil Menon said, because of that thing that, okay, you can go outside, but you have to advocate for your country. So if all high-powered Portuguese in diaspora are connected and they can think of projects and things to develop in their own country, I think that's the most important thing here. So that's why I chose that.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anybody else who has chosen this one that wants to contribute to this? Please.
Well, I think, first of all, I think there is already a virtual Portuguese connection between people who work abroad. I think some talent people, so
yes,
something of the kind already exists. So, in that point, I think it's important. All the projects of bringing the attention to Portugal, definitely it's not the right time, right? I mean, you have to do something probably to prove before you can actually attract people. And we are usually quite good because we adapt quite well organizations as a country. And so I think definitely this is, in my point of view, it's the most important thing.
Okay.
If I can make a comment,
Yeah.
I think what you said is really vital, because there is usually no point to create these networks from scratch. It usually exists informally. You just want to give it some extra push, because it doesn't exist, we're just dreaming. And it's a good activity, but not particularly productive, perhaps. But if it does exist, then it's where we are talking business.
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
Well, my nationality is Swedish, but I usually say that my hardware is Swedish, but my software is probably Latin, Portuguese, Brazilian. But my point is that I think you are looking a bit too narrow, saying that you create a Portuguese, strictly Portuguese network. You need to look at the total power base. I'm Swedish, but I'm definitely part of selling the Portuguese story. And there are probably millions of people that would take on and drive your interests in different parts of the world and in Portugal. I think that's very important. I mean, the 15 million Portuguese people, they are catalysts and the ambassadors, but they would rely on a much bigger power base and use it.
Absolutely right, yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, yeah. Very well. Let's go for the next one. So next question is the following. How should Portugal leverage from the opportunities that globalization can offer? First option, promote public and private policies of brain circulation. Second option, implement bold initiatives to attract foreign talent. Third, foster the capacity to attract foreign direct investment. Fourth, place Portugal as a key globalization network hub in terms of people, goods, and money. And fifth, capitalize on the Portuguese strong multicultural competency. So countdown starts now. Please make your choice. Wow. Well, looks like the two last.
Nobody
options.
wants foreign investment, by the way.
No, nobody wants to attract money, which is
Thank
I don't
you.
know. Okay. So, place Portugal as a key globalization network hub in terms of people, goods, and money looks like an option, and capitalize on the Portuguese strong multicultural competency. Is there anybody in the audience that has selected one of these two that wants to share with us his or her opinion?
Well, first of all, Anil and Yevgeny, thank you very much for a fantastic presentation. It has been a great pleasure to be here. I helped to build some of those options there, so I voted for the one that's my favorite. That's number 4 on the Globalization Network Hub. I have a dream. I I have a dream that one day Lisbon will be the hub, the harbor, one of the harbors of the globalization network. Globalization is about networks, and networks are about hubs. And we, 500 years ago, we were a hub, we were a harbor. And the most interesting characteristic about the harbor is that it's not a place where you stay. It's a place where you go, and you go away, and you come back. So it's the same thing here. I have this dream. One day Lisbon will be a hub in the globalization network. So I've got a question for both of you that maybe I can put right now, why not? How can we make this dream come true?
Well, so first of all, I think it's very compelling and very viable dream, to the extent the dreams can be viable, right? And recall this little motto of mine: to be humble and ambitious at the same time. That's your ambitious part, you know. It's a compelling dream, and then I think the way to start, that's the humble part, and the most interesting part is again to develop a portfolio of projects which would go in that direction. And I think Portuguese-speaking world now, Brazil and countries in Africa are flourishing, they are blossoming, and that's where one can start building this hub to become that can become truly global in a later stages. That's just a hint. I wouldn't paint this dream into specific colors, because otherwise it will lose its luster.
It's a very interesting and powerful idea. When you think about, I mean, you're already making some progress. Last month I came here with my wife, and we sat on that little parkway outside near the water, drinking coffee, and as people said, hello, bon dia, and wave, my wife's saying, should we buy a place here? And I'm like, just because they said hello to you doesn't mean you're going to go buy real estate in that place. But she says, no, I think this is a great place. See the sun, let's think about selling a place in Florida and move here. So she's not coming back to Portugal for a while. But more seriously, think about it. Singapore, right? Think about Singapore as an example. So always metaphorically. This is a place that came out of Malaysia and leapfrogged to a developed status. If you look over the next 5 decades, from 2000 to 2010, 2010 to 2020, if you look at it from 2000 to 2010, 6 or 7 countries of the top 10 GDPs are European. By 2050, only 2 will be in the top 10. All the others are like India, China, Brazil, and the others. However, if you go to GDP per capita, GDP, number 1 this year, or this first decade, is Singapore, number 2 is Hong Kong. And it is the same for every decade going forward. So here you have a small swarm kind of a place, Singapore, that transformed itself. Why? Because it went for global talent, best talent, open environment. So if you look at Portugal, look at it, you got great weather. Anybody coming here, regardless of which part, as you said, whether you're Swedish or any other, you can see yourself there. I see some people, I'm saying, that looks like my brother over here. I saw Pedro. Pedro could pass in India and people would talk to him in Hindi. Right? Because he's got so there is this notion no one will feel uncomfortable. They won't feel like they don't fit. Anybody, whether European, Asian, African, heritage, you can feel comfortable coming in. Then you come to the whole thing. So it all comes back to you. Do you have great engineering talent and schools and business environment? Do you enable it? You have some of those pieces. You have that here. And then it's a great place to come and visit. So why would you not be able to create a global talent pool and using technology? I just want to add one more thing, which is we do something called telepresence. We use telepresence globally now. I actually work with people around the world I've never met, but I feel like I know them. Because when you talk on the phone, that's one step forward. But when you can see them, is the next step. When I can lean forward and touch down, it becomes more personal. Now, I may not be able to lean and touch over in video, not yet. But the point is using those technologies, using this cultural context, the historical context, you should be asking, why are you not? If Singapore can do it, It was through sheer willpower. You don't have the challenges of some other countries.
Yes, please.
Thank you for fantastic presentations. By the way, Anil, I was also trained by Jesuits, but were not as successful with me as they were with you.
That's not the way we think of you.
So I totally agree with the words of Paulo, and I think this is the vision that we have. I think we have conspirating a lot because we want to sell this vision of Portugal as a hub for innovation, for people, goods, money, and I think we even have used a few times the word of it would be a dream to become the Singapore of the Atlantic, which is a nice, and maybe extending it a little bit further. I think the next competition for talent all over the world will be not for just talent, but for entrepreneur talent. And I think the dream of every country, and I think there is an opportunity in Europe, is to become a cool place where people can innovate. And that I think it's a dream that is especially an opportunity that is especially open for countries in Southern Europe, because it's like California, it's cool weather, it's cool, you have beaches, people can go there, you just don't have the access to the venture capital, you just don't have, you just have still a bit complicated regulations and so on and so on. So what do you think, what strategies could we implement in order to foster a country like Portugal as a cool place where people could innovate? And maybe another question to you, Anil, do you think that the conditions for young people to innovate in India are there? And with such a huge flow of talent, could we maybe attract, and then with the links that we have in India, maybe do you think we could position Portugal as a cool place where people in India could come and innovate?
Evgeny, you want to?
I think that the key point is to see what is the heterogeneity of Portugal. It's a fairly small country, but there is a more dynamic segments. And the key thing is to see what these segments are. Another strategy would be is to try to see what kind of background conditions in general you can create. But if India tried to follow this strategy, or China, it would have developed the way it developed now. Because you have Bangalore, which is first world within India, and you have the rest of India, which remains the first world. It is catching up, but this heterogeneity is there, and you want to leverage it, a better performing part of it. The same, I think, applies to Portugal. It's very hard to transform the country. It's a project of several generations. It's much easier in the short term and medium term to see what kind of innovation clusters, the clusters that we see now, for instance, in Argentina, in Bariloche, where Brazilians like to go. It's a wonderful weather, wonderful climate. They have a very good innovation clusters in terms of satellite technology developing there. If Argentina can do it, there is no reason Portugal can't.
Yeah. I'll just pick up your last point, which is, I don't think Bangalore became what Bangalore was because somebody had a strategy for it. If it is hidden strategy. Bangalore, everyone went there because the weather is great. It is very temperate. It's not like Bombay or Delhi or some others. It also was a place where there were engineering schools, and so some of these companies, Infosys and Wipro, started there, and soon everybody migrated to that place. To me, Indians have always gone anywhere. There's a joke that, when Edward Hillary went up to the mountains and he stood there and says, "Oh, I'm so cold." One Indian said, "Chai, chai, chai," and served him tea. You go anywhere in the world, there are some Indians because they've been entrepreneurial. They've had to be in order to grow some of the stuff. So coming to Portugal, maybe I'm just biased, but I always look at countries and I say, it comes back to the willpower. You just start a strategy. By the way, I will say one more thing, which is that unless you have a sense of there's danger, the country will never exist, which is what Singapore had. That somebody's, I always tell you, you're not paranoid if somebody's really following you. Mm-hmm. And Singapore had issues, and they came out of it because Lee Kuan Yew forced on people to say, this is a matter of life and death. Now his worry is people don't worry about life and death. So I think in Portugal, because of historical sense, the weather is great, maybe there is not this sense of urgency. I got to do that. Unless you build that sense of urgency, it's not going to happen.
Yes, there was a question there. Please.
No, I see that point number 4 and 5, they are very strongly linked together, and I understand that quite a lot from some events in outsourcing to attract outsourcing companies to Portugal. But I think that Paulo's dream is definitely feasible. I think it can be accomplished, but we have to remember that places like Singapore and Hong Kong, they have a tax system that is totally different. If we would be able to approach that, I'm sure that number 3 would be solved, and by that, number 2 and 1 as well. And then you have the whole list done, and your dream will come true. It will take 10 years, but I don't think it's so easy to change the tax system with the Troika and so on. But even without that, I think your dream is realistic. It can be accomplished, but and it starts with the 4 and 5.
But can I intervene at this point? I think we should be ready to accept partial realization of the dreams. And one of the good examples of this partial dreams coming true would be New Zealand, for instance, where you would have, it's a country where the UK used to grow butter, and they still sell ships of the butter to the UK. But it's also now the place where one of the most vibrant and dynamic clusters of creative industries is being developed. The movie sets are now being set in New Zealand for Europe and for the Hollywood. And you need quite a bit of creative talent for that. And that's something that never would have thought of 10 years ago. So one has to be prepared to recognize this opportunity. You're absolutely right. It can't be done from the top down because, well, but that's where all these networks, I think, are great to see where new innovation clusters and creative industries can develop, because it's increasingly about service industries. It's increasingly about cultural tourism, ecological tourism, somewhere where you can add value, but in a big way, in a service sector. We have seen little about it before, but it's now becoming the rule of the game.
This is very interesting. So don't look just to the whole thing, start in small.
Yeah, the world is becoming the world of innovation clusters, not the world of countries. Yeah. So the Bangalore would have much more connection to Silicon Valley than, for instance, Iowa would have a connection to Silicon Valley.
Yeah, sure. Is there any more questions in the audience, please?
I had the opportunity to live in several countries, and some big, some smaller, of different backgrounds, and Anglo-Saxonic or Latin, maybe, basically. And one thing I notice is the bigger the country, the less open-minded people are. Less open to new cultures, right? I think this is probably one of the biggest assets of Portugal, is that we can stay here with several generations all talking in English, and probably if you were talking Spanish, you could do the same, or at least understand.
You could have told me that before.
But I mean, if I go to Spain, for instance, which is of course much bigger, or if I go to Italy, which, I mean, we are all Southerns, but we don't talk language, we are not as open-minded to that. Or Brazil, for instance, the same. I mean, I was in Brazil. People move a lot, much more than we do, which I think one of the biggest problems of Portugal, because we enjoy the sun and the places like you. But my point is there a difference? I mean, are we more prepared to be, because of all these external influences, to be much easier to globalize than some of the people of the big countries? Out of necessity, because necessity, of course, improves that a lot, right?
I think the world is already globalizing, maybe not even becoming aware of it, for example. I mean, I remember many years ago going to England And now if you go to England, chicken tikka masala is the major diet of England, right? You go anywhere, you find Chinese food, you find Indian food, and increasingly you see fogo de chao showing up in India and all the others. I mean, they haven't come to India yet, but it's only a matter of time before they show up in India. I think we have to think in terms of, if you look at India, or you look at China, or you go to some place, there's a small layer of people who actually know what the heck is going on around. The others wouldn't know where Portugal is on the map and would probably not care. Just like if you go beyond a certain level in Portugal, they would not know where Bangalore is. In fact, I got an email from one guy, not from Portugal, but somewhere else. I said, I've gone to Bangalore. He said, oh, I hope you're enjoying Bangladesh. And I said, other than the B, I'm not quite sure how you ended up from Bangalore to Bangladesh. A totally different country. But as long as he said it's in the same zone, you should probably have the same lifestyle. I think most people are living their own lives. They worry about their own jobs. They worry about their own family. So globalization is too esoteric a concept for many of them. It may trickle down to them. So I want to pick up that point, which is we don't need to think about how Portugal can become globalized overnight or any of that kind of stuff, or Silicon Valley. You're already globalized. And I don't want to be Pollyannish by saying you can easily get there. I know it's hard. But the question I ask myself is, what's your other option? What's your other option? When you don't have any other option, then why are you wasting your time debating, should I do this, should I not do that? It's a worthless use of your time to debate that. Say, where am I going to get started? What am I going to do in the next 5 years? And if you try to fix the whole world's economy and the world's country's problem, so you start at your own. IT sector is the most globalized. By nature, it's a globalized. So is there any excuse for the IT sector not to start the whole thing? Why wait for the government to pass taxation laws or something? Do it on your own. If you think tax policy here is bad, come to India, go to US. I mean, it's even worse than here. So they're doing it. So you start with them and say, you know what, I'm going to get started. Hopefully over time somebody else will say, textile, I'll do the same. And coffee, I'll do the same. Wine, I'll do the same. And before you know it, the government's saying, I better get started because I may not have a job if these guys are already doing it. So I think that's how I would approach it.
I think your intervention is very interesting, and just two comments on it. Usually when we engage in these conversations, the audience would listen sympathetically, and they say very politely, well, but you don't understand, we are different. we are this, that, and that. But when you engage a little bit more, it turns out they're not. It's because I don't think you can have a blanket statement about cultures anymore. Cultures are very heterogeneous, right? And that applies to Portuguese culture as well. And what matters is this dynamic, better performing segment, which is already, as Anil said, part of the world. And you certainly have that. So the question is how to expand it while doing things. It's useful to talk about them, but it's mainly learning by doing. And then the question just become irrelevant in a way. We are already in.
Last question, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much to both participants. It was really a pleasure to hear you. It was entertaining. It was funny as well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much also to the moderator for the introduction. I would like to ask one question. I have been in last month in Silicon Valley. So it's a place where you just live fast, definitely. And Portugal now has a compelling argument for selling itself to the world. As you mentioned, we have universities that are internalized, they belong in international networks, good scientific production. We have a good IT infrastructure in Portugal, much better actually than the United States. The mobile, it's not crashing all the time and so on. And we have good talent coming from our universities. We get some entrepreneurs that are already abroad in developing their projects in the innovation hubs in the world. So a good a number of, we have, as you mentioned, a society that has an openness to cultural diversification. It's been recognized that Portugal is one of the countries in Europe where multiculturalism has worked better, much better than other countries in Europe. So it's a compelling argument, actually. But from my point of view, the most challenging factor here, but not here, probably in Europe or even in the world, it's cultural and country inertia. So, in other words, the ability to change. We know that inertia is basically something that is around the world. Even the United States said that they have to, used to be more prone to change rather than they are now. So, and we know that these countries that have leapfrogged in the last 20 years, they have, or apparently they have, a small resistance to inertia. I don't know if it's life threats or other factors that promote. My question is basically how we can promote, let's say, a lower level of resistance to change. Because there was someone that says that things come to Portugal in 20 years ago, took 20 years to come here. Now takes 5. And I think that, but nevertheless, we see also Glee here and other HBO blockbusters.
Oh, I was watching great shows last night.
Right. So we have cable as well. So the point is that how to manage that our entrepreneurs, our elite, our people that are in the front of society can lower that resistance to change.
If you don't mind, I'll just take that very quickly. It's very interesting because coming from Silicon Valley, where we have our headquarters, 4 years ago, our company decided that we are a victim of our own success. From going from $1 billion to $40 billion in 15 years with $43 billion of cash, we become victims of our own success. And the danger of success is that you have more to lose. So when you are starting out, the things that you do to win are different when later when you're trying to protect what you have. And when you're trying to avoid mistakes, you do different things than when you're trying to win or when you're trying to succeed. So the company said, we're going to create a second headquarters. We're going to place it in Bangalore. We're going to move some of our top talent there. And we're going to tell, go do what you have to do to make the company different for the next Cisco. So first point is that people don't like to be changed. They like to be the ones changing. That's the first one. Can you create the culture where they feel like they are the ones changing as opposed to being told to change? That's the first thing I've learned for the last several years. Second one is, I think this inertia is a natural thing. I look at my age as I'm getting to be an old man. I find myself less and less willing to do new things. So I have to force myself to say, I'm going to take that risk to do it. And I think success is the worst thing that can happen to you. Because the more successful you become, the more you feel you have to lose and less chances you take. Companies like Portugal and the others that have done well, over time, you can sit there saying, it's not the greatest, but at least I got great weather, I got great food, I got great people. Let's not try something really radical because we have a lot more to lose. And I think if you can get that mindset that says it's not about losing, it's about creating new option, and that I don't know how you build. It is, you either have it or you don't. Silicon Valley has that. Everything else is like the tangibles. The intangible was the willingness to fail, and the willingness to say, I failed, but I'm going to try again. I'm going to try again. And I think that cultural mindset, I think, is that inertia, which I don't know how you do that. And if any who studied this may have some thoughts on that.
I think that propensity to change, it emerges also incrementally. It doesn't obviously emerge overnight. And I'm as an outsider, I see in Portugal already this propensity to change. For instance, the highest share of women in R&D staff, the highest in the world. I mean, it's hard data, and it's useful. It's easy to understand why it comes from. When you have such a meteoric increase in R&D personnel and R&D productivity, that's where you draw on young and new talent. That's where women come from. Certainly much higher than in Singapore. So that's one indication, and that's me as an outsider who knows very little about Portugal has been able to detect. So look for great propensity to change in some partial areas. Then you would be more confident that the country already has this propensity. It is not sort of something that is constructed from top down. It emerges from bottom up, from some isolated examples, and then you have to have self-confidence. That's why it's so important to celebrate emerging successes. It's like self-fulfilling prophecy. Once you recognize it, you will do it more. If you don't, you will probably remain the same.
Okay. Thank you very much to you all. Thank you very much to both the speakers. Your insights were very useful for this. And there are three big things that came out from this session today. There are, first, Portugal needs to have a project, and it doesn't necessarily need to be as big as being Silicon Valley. It has to be a project, well-defined project. Second, Portugal needs to risk. And third, there is sense of urgency. We need to stop talking and start doing things. So thank you very much, and I hope this has inspired you for the next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Terminamos mais uma sessão do 21º Congresso das Comunicações.